With the United States now having killed 11 Venezuelans, albeit alleged members of a cartel, one wonders if we might soon be adding another state to the board. And, of course, that will have spillover effects to the conflict on the minds of everyone. This is the USS Lake Erie. Is she named for the most beautiful lake in the world? Perhaps. But I can tell you with more confidence that she is one of at least 9 military vessels currently deployed toward Venezuela. Their mission? Good question. Officially, the group is deployed to the region to address drug exports, but the size and the shape of the U.S. forces in the region indicate otherwise, even as the first shots of whatever type of conflict that we are witnessing have targeted cartel operations. So, today, we will discuss what exactly is parked outside of Venezuela, some alternative theories about the operation, including preventing potential expansion of Russian influence, halting the production of Venezuelan drones, which might give us some flashbacks to another recent U.S. operation, the situation with Guyana and its oil industry, and to assist with a potential domestic rebellion, which I think is the most important to cover, though it might be all of the above that is driving the U.S. decision. Then we will conclude with how serious movement in Venezuela might affect the broader conflict map. But let's start things off with what the United States is actually doing, which apparently is to come here. The question itself is interesting, because mainstream news outlets have hardly covered this story. Indeed, Venezuela flew under the radar until Trump announced the move of U.S. Space Command to Alabama, and then offhand volunteered that the United States had fired the first shots of the operation. That created some buzz, which then exploded when Trump released this video on Truth Social. To be fair to the mainstream press, Washington was not exactly shouting out the mission from the rooftops before the kinetic action began. The most that you might have heard about it was a question or two during a White House press briefing. I suppose that is a testament to how much else is going on in the world right now, and the limited bandwidth that the media has to cover such situations. But the lack of coverage from the media was a gamble. Washington had ordered a non-trivial deployment, and it will look bad in retrospect if this goes beyond a one-off ship destruction. We will see what happens now that the chips are down. Anyway, the United States has moved at least 9 vessels into the region. 1 cruiser, 3 destroyers, 1 fast attack submarine, 3 vessels from a Marine Air-Ground Task Force, and 1 littoral combat ship. By the way, I spared no expense going through the DoD photo archives to ensure that we had correct images of all of the vessels. The aforementioned Lake Erie, the Samson, the Gravely, the Jason Dunham, the Newport News, the Iwo Jima, which we'll talk about again in a second, the San Antonio, the Fort Lauderdale, and the Minneapolis St. Paul. Then there may also be 1 or more military Sea Lift Command vessels, as well as 1 or more U.S. Coast Guard cutters. They do not exactly tell us everything. Regardless, remember that the stated purpose of this mission is to intercept drug shipments. Well, looking back at the deployment package, could these vessels do that? I mean, I guess. But let me tell you about the Iwo Jima for a moment. I took a trip to Norfolk, Virginia recently. This was the view from my hotel room. When I stepped out on the balcony, I thought for a second that I was looking at an aircraft carrier. Ultimately, it was not. This is the Bataan, which is the same class as the Iwo Jima. Point is, it is only 250 feet shorter than a real carrier. And even knowing the difference, looking at some photos from the top of the Iwo Jima, it is still easy to convince yourself that it is a traditional carrier. That seems like a bit of overkill when you are trying to catch the likes of these guys. Now, to be clear, they have started intercepting drug vessels, as we saw from the earlier video. But if that is all they are doing, the point still stands about it being overkill. Instead, these 5 vessels would seem to have a primary role of launching Tomahawk cruise missiles, this thing here, which carry 1,000-pound warheads and can fly the entire length of Venezuela. Now, could you use a Tomahawk to strike drug cartels in Venezuela? I suppose, but goodness, that is a lot of firepower. And I am not sure that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro would appreciate the nuance of who is in the crosshairs. Meantime, these are marine vessels. Consequently, their best use is for expeditionary missions, landing Marines on Venezuelan territory to do something? Now, could you use them to arrest or kill drug cartel leadership? I suppose. But goodness, that is still putting boots on the ground. And I am still not sure that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro would appreciate the nuance of who is in the crosshairs. It may be further worth noting that this is the first vessel eliminated, and while a Tomahawk did not destroy it, some kind of missile did. So maybe having all of this force there is Trump trying to convince the cartels that he is not playing around. A couple of notes about this. 1. Even if the cartels are the main target, it is easy for this to turn into a war against an opposing state. That is, in part, how the United States ended up in Afghanistan for 2 decades, fighting a state because a non-state opponent is wrapped up in a state. And, actually, the line is blurred there. Put a pin in that for a minute. Second, this ought to be the final nail in the coffin in regard to what the meaning of America First is. A recurring point on this channel is that the phrase means 2 different things to 2 different groups. One sees it as American isolationism. The other sees it as the United States doing what it wants on the international stage, ignoring complaints that it is overexercising its military power. Essentially, this is a throwback to the George W. Bush administration, but turned up to 11. Well, we have seen an extended bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen, a quick but major B-2 bombing run against Iran, and now this, among other things. I think that ought to tell you everything that you need to know about how Trump views America First policy. And look, it may end up being the case that the large deployment is just a shock and awe exercise to convince any potential cartel affiliate to think twice about their occupation. And the bigger the force that you bring, the more splash that it has on communicating the message. Still, all of the extra firepower leaves open the question of what else might the United States be up to here. One answer points eastward to Russia, and I think that this needs some context of what it is not. About a month ago, a semi-official Iranian governmental news agency reported that Russia was going to deploy Oreshniks to Venezuela. You may remember these as the nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles that Russia fired on Ukraine once in November 2024, which Putin warned in this video signaled was the beginning of a new level of crisis escalation. Then everyone realized that these were just expensive missiles that travel really fast, but otherwise are not particularly concerning, and then the whole thing rightfully faded into memory. Cue some sarcastic clapping. Of course, that did not stop op-eds about how this is a new Cuban Missile Crisis, claiming that the United States must intervene now or face the consequences. In truth, though, the Cuban Missile Crisis created a new danger for the United States, because the Soviet Union was stationing nuclear weapons in Cuba that could strike the United States' mainland. Today, however, everything inside of the United States is already in range of Russia's intercontinental ballistic missiles. So, no need to worry that placing Oreshniks in Venezuela alters the balance of power in any meaningful way. Nevertheless, Venezuela would like to work closer with Russia. Thus, what we might be witnessing here is a 21st century application of the Monroe Doctrine. The United States is placing assets in the region to deter Russia from trying to increase ties to a country on this side of the Atlantic. Bear in mind that this comes at a time when leaders from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and others are all meeting in Beijing, which is placing greater stress on the Western coalition. Sticking with the theme of preventing arms production, let's talk about drones. And this further convolutes our trial by fire. There are rumors of cooperation between Iran and Venezuela on drone production. Venezuela has already produced the Zamora V1, which is a riff on the Shahed 131. It only has a range of 19 miles, though, so perhaps watch out USS Lake Erie, but also Lake Erie has nothing to worry about. That said, a properly made Shahed drone, up to specs like what Russia uses in Ukraine, has a range of 1,600 miles. Lo and behold, such distance takes you all the way to Tallahassee, Florida. And while I am sure that the folks in Tuscaloosa, Alabama might not be too dismayed by that news, it represents a serious change to the threat that Venezuela poses to the United States. As such, one possibility is that the United States is positioning a strike force to either go after some ongoing Venezuelan production site or to deter Venezuela from starting one. This draws a parallel to the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities back in June. The B-2 bombing runs received all of the media attention, but they were only a part of the operation. Another part was a healthy dose of Tomahawk missiles, which, guess what, are aplenty aboard the naval contingent deployed to the region. Maybe they are there for the job themselves, or maybe they await a call from the Air Force to start going. Either way, the fleet may be doing more than counter-cartel operations. The third possibility on the books is the broader situation with Guyana. Remember that? Yeah, that was the major news story for a hot minute at the end of 2023. I think it serves as a friendly reminder why the masses tend to overestimate the frequency of conflict. It is easy to remember the cases where wars happen, but it is also easy to forget when the threats quietly disappear from the news cycle. Except this time, it might begin again. Here is the short version of the story. Guyana discovered absurd quantities of oil along its coastline. In what might have seemed like a joke only about a decade ago, the IMF projects that Guyana's per capita GDP will exceed the United States' this year. Well, unless Venezuela claims that a section of Guyana actually belongs to Venezuela, and therefore so does this oil. The December 2023 flare-up came as Venezuela held a referendum on whether its own population agreed that the land Guyana currently controls actually belongs to Venezuela. The timing of the U.S. deployment is hard to explain on account of this, though, because not much has happened recently to draw a response from Washington, beyond a couple of exceptions this year. On March 1st, a Venezuelan patrol ship moved within 700 meters of an ExxonMobil floating production and offloading vessel. It then radioed, "You are operating in the exclusive economic zone of Venezuela." ExxonMobil was unimpressed. Then, on August 31st, a boat carrying Guyanese election officials was shot at from Venezuela as they traveled along a river between the countries. The timing of the second incident does not line up at all with the deployment, of course, because the U.S. Navy got underway well before then. So your speculation is as good as mine why this is happening now, if Guyana is the main factor behind the deployment. The final possibility is regime change in Venezuela, and the conversation surrounding this prospect tends to lose some of the nuance. Make no mistake, the United States wants him gone. Here is his wanted poster, with the cash reward recently doubled to $50 million. And, actually, going back to the comparison to Afghanistan, you can see that little distinction is being made between the world leader and the cartel business. However, these ships by themselves are not enough to launch a normal operation to remove a well-entrenched leader. The 1989 overthrow of Panama's Manuel Noriega provides a useful parallel here. A couple of autocratic leaders who ignore election results, 2 countries tied to the drug trade, and strategic interests in both locations, oil in Venezuela, and a canal in Panama. The big difference is that the Panama invasion force was 27,000 strong. Meanwhile, the Marine detachment near Venezuela is only 3,000. So unless they are planning a very precise arrest and extraction, the overthrow strategy must be radically different. With all of the tomahawks, you might suspect that the plan is to bomb Venezuela into submission. Well, if I were Maduro, I might be careful with my upcoming travel plans. But such pure bombing campaigns have a poor track record at accomplishing this type of goal. Just look at what happened over in Yemen earlier this year, with the United States trying to blast the Houthis into submission. There was some attrition of the Houthi capacity, yes, but the movement lives on and is still causing trouble along the Red Sea. But while Venezuela warns the United States not to step foot in the country, it remains possible to overthrow Maduro without doing so. The key is having a substitute for your own boots on the ground. One thing that often gets missed in the Trump is getting adventurous in every place other than Ukraine discussion is that Maduro is unpopular in Venezuela and, by most international accounts, lost the 2024 election by a significant margin. The problem for potential protesters in any country is that staging an uprising is risky, especially when the government has all of the military hardware. Some of that concern dissipates when a foreign power can provide the counterbalance, as the United States might be doing. There is even a leader waiting in exile, again widely regarded as the legitimate winner of the previous election. But there is a bit of a chicken or egg problem here, where the foreign power might not want to pay for a deployment to start a revolution that never happens, while the revolutionaries do not want to test the government without knowing that they will have backup. Well, the United States may have resolved that problem by taking the initiative. What happens next is in the hands of the Venezuelan masses. I want to close out by putting this in the broader context of the world at war. One last look at the map for posterity's sake. A ton of ink has been spilled about how Russia is using its oil revenues to fund its invasion of Ukraine, largely thanks to the willing buyers in China and India. However, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. The only problem is that the crude is heavy and sour. Refineries in the United States can handle it, but the United States has most Venezuelan oil under sanction. If Maduro disappears, however, and there is a clean transition to a democratically elected leader, then the sanctions go away, and suddenly a whole bunch of new oil enters the market. It might take a bit of time for all of this to happen, but eventually you get lower prices on the global market, which will either restrain Russia's capacity in Ukraine if the war is still ongoing, or reduce Russia's ability to reload in the event of a ceasefire. Either way, that will be a significant win for the broader Western coalition. Speaking of significant wins, you can score a couple of easy ones with these two books on the war. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.